Hello Internet! Today we're going to do a quick rundown and installation guide to the 3 most common types of freehub. The first freehub body we're going to talk about is probably the one you're most familiar with, the Shimano HD freehub body. Now this was for years the standard of all freehub bodies, but that changed probably around 10 years ago, and I'll explain why in a moment. This freehub body requires the cogs to be slid on and then cranked up using a cassette tool just there. Whilst this is a reliable and very common freehub body, even in road cycling to this day, it does have its limitations, most notably by the fact that because of the size of the freehub body itself, the smallest sprocket you can get on there is an 11 tooth. When mountain bikes went to 1 chainring out the front, this was purely a limitation, as some brands wanted to go down to 10 or even 9 tooth sprockets. It's still not uncommon to find on downhill bikes, largely thanks to Shimano Saint still being 10-speed, and it definitely still has its place. The next one to come along was the big game changer. It was the XD freehub body from SRAM. Now this was a threaded interface and did without a lot of the smaller parts you'd find on a HD freehub body. These cassettes are just one piece. The notable benefit of this XD freehub body is with these one-piece cassettes, they could, at the time, provide a far greater range than they could get with the limitation of the size of the HD freehub body. Next we have the Shimano Microspline, which was their response to SRAM's efforts with the XD freehub body. It kind of includes attributes from both, with the slide-on functionality of the HG, but with the ability to run smaller sprockets of the XD. Both are considered, I'd say, the modern standards, whereas slowly over time, I can imagine the HD being phased out on high-end mountain bikes. Although these freehubs all vary in design, they do at least use the same tools, a standard cassette lock ring tool and a chain whip, and hopefully that doesn't change anytime soon. So once removing this lock ring, we can then slide off the cassette. This block can do 10 or 11 speed systems. Currently I've got a 10-speed cassette on here for my downhill bike, and so I'm using a spacer there, which often comes with the cassette. That's really important and it gives a lot of versatility to it. These freehub bodies are very versatile and they're seen all over the industry, but they do kind of have one weakness, and that is how steel sprockets can sometimes tear into the freehub body, especially when it's a particularly soft or light alloy. Now, there's one way around this, which is to try and use a cassette that has quite a large kind of central column there, or one that uses as much alloy spider as you can get really. That basically will stop its teeth digging in and damaging the freehub body. If this does happen, it's not a great situation. If installation or removal is becoming more difficult, you can just kind of file off the edges and it kind of does turn it into consumable parts. They should go for a long time, but like I said, if you're putting down large amounts of torque with steel sprockets, individual steel sprockets, they can sometimes run into an issue. If your cassette is refusing to come off because of something like those little scour marks, it can be worth delivering a small blow with a hammer at a diagonal angle, which can make the cassette shuffle and wriggle loose, which can then aid taking it off. Not too hard, and use a toffee hammer is always best, or a soft mallet. If those scarring marks are pretty bad, you can then just take to them with a file to smooth them out, and it shouldn't be too much of an issue. When it comes to reinstalling your cassette, simply put that alignment block, which is the narrowest one, in the 12 o'clock position, and then just slide your cassette blocks on. The clever part about that small aligning block there is that it stops you putting on your cogs in the wrong orientation. This is really important because these have ramps in particular ways to help up or down shifts. When installing the lock ring, it becomes quickly apparent how important spacing is on this cassette because it only has a few rotations of thread engaged. That means that if you've got an 11-speed cassette, really don't use that spacer because if it takes up any thread at all, it will probably just strip. Similarly, if you don't use it, it's going to be quite baggy, so the tolerances are quite fine, and you just need to be cognizant of that. When it comes to tightening it up, this tool is relatively big for a reason. You don't want to be hanging off it, but you want to be pretty firm. If you're unsure, check torque specs of the cassette and freehub body just for extra safety. Next up, we have the big game changer when it came out around 10 years ago. This was the SRAM XD, and you can see how different it is. It does have some similar traits, mainly these notches at the base of the freehub body that will help the cassette become aligned. But the main difference is it moves all of the things that made the HD freehub body bulky towards its outer edge inboard. Most notably, that lock ring. The thread is now deep in the cassette. And basically, as you turn what was the lock ring, it actually spins a whole sleeve inside the cassette. That's one of the reasons that these are one whole body. When installing them, it's always worth just turning them until you feel it clunk and engage on those kind of base notches there, and before doing it up. Again, it uses a very large tool, so it's got to be pretty tight. And last but not least of the three most common types of cassette is this Microspline one. Now, you can actually see here, the way that it manages to blend the characteristics of its tried and true HD with the greater range of the XD is it basically takes the freehub body and transitions the way the smaller teeth integrate into actually kind of a Russian doll situation where each chainring supports the next, but in turn gets smaller, tapering it to a point. Because the rest of the freehub functions much in the same way that a standard HD body would. This was really important for Shimano because it largely enabled them to get with the program when it came to 1x drivetrains. Both these freehub bodies are actually pretty good, and they've been really important to mountain biking. Both Shimano and SRAM are actually doing a really, really good job, I think, in this area, but there are also loads of other smaller brands offering up cassettes as well, and able to take advantage of the design freedom of having so much choice. In terms of running these cassettes, I don't use any grease or anything like that. I think that it's managed to negate some of the problems that the HD freehub bodies had simply by having more teeth so they can share the torque better. There can be some scarring on them, but it tends to be, to my mind, more superficial than anything. Reinstalling these isn't as easy potentially as the SRAM because there are just more parts. Bit of patience though, and it shouldn't be a problem. And you just have to look for those guide marks as you put the cassette back together. And that's it. Those are the three main types of freehub body you will find on your mountain bike and how to install and remove that cassette. Now, the gear wars were a dark time and it pitted brother against brother and family against family, but I think we're finally through it now and mountain biking's in rude health. Thanks guys, and we'll see you next time.